Good morning.
Morning there.
How you doing?
Good, thanks. And yourself?
Yeah, pretty well. Okay, so I've just gone after the half hour, so let's just get straight into the questions. So the first question has a reference coming from Bhagavad Gita chapter 4, verse 26. We tend to relive experiences through memory and indulge in that sense perception. This seems to apply to both good and bad experiences. Do desires develop as a result of this and lack of restraint? Okay, so let's have a look at the section in the text. It says, but after the perception ends, the mind tends to linger in the enjoyment. It tries to relive the experience through memory and indulge in that sense perception mentally. If your mind continues to revive and revel in past experiences, you develop desires for those sense objects. So this is talking about the experience that we all have of having a sense perception, and at the end of it, or after it's completed, we tend to go back, or put it this way, the mind tends to go back and relive the experience and indulge in it. He says if your mind continues to revive and revel in the past experience, you develop desires for those objects. So this is how desire is developed. A desire is developed as a flow of indiscriminate thought. So that means that the thought is flowing on its own without any conscious decision or awareness or sanctioning of the intellect. Gita actually, he talks about this directly. He says a person who muses on objects where the mind is just flowing on its own develops attachment. From attachment arises desire, from desire anger, etc. It goes on. So this is exactly what that's saying. Yes, we tend to relive and indulge in both good and bad experiences through memory. Does this develop desires? Yes. But the question is, why do we indulge, or what's going on when the mind indulges in painful memories? It's understandable for a memory that was enjoyable, something we liked about it, for the mind to go back. But why would the mind go back to something that was unpleasant? The thing to understand about memories is that the more emotional charge there is, the stronger the memory. So if you have an experience of something where there's a lot of emotion associated with it, that will form a stronger memory. So let's look at it this way. Let's look at it from the perspective of what's the ego getting out of it. And again, when it comes to a positive memory, it's fairly easy to understand what the ego is getting out of indulging in a positive memory, but it's reviving a painful memory. What does the ego get out of that? So the ego has many branches, including desire and attachment, which is what we're talking about here. When we have a negative experience, we can define that as the frustration or the obstruction of our desires and attachments. Take a simple one, you're having a negative experience in traffic. It's because you have a desire for free-flowing traffic and it's a traffic jam. Someone whom you love rejects you. It's a painful experience. Why? Well, because I have a desire for that person. I'm attached to them. What's happening is perhaps that the mind is returning to the desire. Right? And we see this happen all the time. If we have a person, say, for whom we have an attachment or whom we desire, we haven't had any negative experiences with that person. Perhaps we haven't had a great deal of positive experiences with that person either. They're a fairly neutral person, but there's a desire for them. There's an attachment to them. The mind will keep returning to that person. If we have had a negative experience with them, then the mind naturally goes to that person because of desire and attachment for them. And then, because of that powerful emotional memory that is there, it associates back to that past experience. And so it's not that the ego is saying, oh, I want to revel in something that is painful. What's happening is that the mind is going to what it always does. Things that I have desire for, things that I'm attached to. Once it's there, it connects to the past memory. And so it looks to us like the mind is indulging in the memory of something that was painful from the past. It's more that the mind is just going to desire, and there happens to be a negative associated memory with it. The other way that you can view this is from the perspective that nature always helps. What does that mean? If you have a period of time where you have upset stomach, what's going on? Well, I don't know, upset stomach. So I go to the doctor. Doctor does some tests, they figure it out and they treat it. Nature is sending you those pain signals from your stomach. Why? To draw your attention there, so that you will do something about it, so that you will help to heal it. In a similar way, if there is a aspect of the personality that has a negative memory associated with it, if we find the mind is going back there, you can treat it like the same way. The psychological body has an upset and it's drawing my attention there. Why? So that I can become aware of it, find out what it is, and then treat it. So if we look at both of these aspects together, one is that the ego is getting something out of it. It just likes going to that. And the second is that nature always helps. It's drawing my attention to something that needs to be addressed. Associated with this is the fact that once all of this phenomenon has been set up, there can be further, if you like, benefits to the ego down the track. If my mind keeps going back to a tragic loss, I, if you like, am not so much reveling in that loss, but I'm involved in it. I'm involved in my suffering. What I might find is that I get a lot of sympathy from others. All of a sudden, people hold me less to account for some of my responsibilities. They give me a little leeway. The guy's just had a significant loss. Yeah, give him some leeway on his work. Give him some leeway on his responsibilities socially, as a parent, as whatever else. These things we can also get attached to. We can get attached to some of the adornments, if you like, that come with that kind of suffering. And so it becomes a bit more tangled, because there's some things that the ego actually likes out of this. And there's something that the individual hates, which is that feeling of loss being repeated. So you take all of that together, you start to get a picture of what the individuality or the mind is doing. But the short answer to the question is that whenever the mind is on its own traveling back to an existing attachment, you're building it as a desire, or an existing desire, you're strengthening it, or a past experience, it goes back to it as a desire and continues to build. Okay, any clarifications?
So then how do you stop it on the how do you stop the mind from when it's in it? I mean, you know it's being drawn there. The chapter in the Gita is on, or the topic is on restraint, if I'm not mistaken. So in a situation like this, and maybe trying to apply the yagna, and how do you look at it?
Yeah. So the perspective that we took of what the ego gets out of it and nature always helps can both be useful here. Let's take the second one first. If your mind is going back to something repeatedly and you're indulging if you like in negative past experiences, treat that like a sore ankle. Treat it like a sore back. There's something in my personality that hurts. So think about addressing it like that. And so what that means will vary depending upon the context and what it is you're experiencing. But if you look at it from that perspective, there's an element of treating a wound rather than uprooting a desire. So, now what treatment of it means, as I say, is a broad scope depending upon the circumstances. The second, from the earlier aspect, the idea of what's the ego getting out of it. One of the ways that you can manage this, and this is what he's talking about in this verse with restraint, is to catch yourself doing it. Now, you can't make yourself aware of what the mind is doing. If the mind has gone back to a past experience and it's indulging in it, the nature of indulgence is that we don't know we're doing it until something happens and we suddenly become aware, I'm indulging back in that memory again. At that point, you can speak to the mind. Okay, so one of the analogies that the Swami uses is to say that the intellect is like the adult, the mind is like a child. In the Christian Bible, you have Christ talking to the devil. So these ideas of Christ talking to the devil is the intellect speaking to the mind. If you are going to deal with the mind, treat it like a child from the perspective of an adult. So then the moment you catch the mind indulging in a past negative experience, begin to question it. And you can use the first person, what am I thinking about? You can use the second person, what are you thinking about? You can use the first person plural, what are we thinking about? Whatever feels natural to you. But you can say, well, what is the mind thinking about? What am I thinking about? I'm thinking about such and such, that loss. Why am I thinking about it? And if it makes sense that there's a reason, reply with that. Often it might be, I don't know. I don't know why I'm thinking about it. But address that question and think about it from the perspective of what does the mind want. Okay, I've had a loss. A person in my life has passed away. What do I want? I want that person back. Now, you know that's not reasonable, but that's not what we're talking about. You're asking what the mind wants. I want that person back. Then what would you do? Well, then be guided as if you were speaking to a child. You would provide the mind with the knowledge of the intellect. So let's say it's something else. Let's say you have you've lost let's say you're frustrated because you've had to give up something else. The mind may go back to the sense of frustration. Your doctor's told you have to give up alcohol, right? Your mind keeps going back to experiences of that. It keeps going back to the doctor telling you, keeps going back to what you want and so forth. You can also address it in terms of giving it a higher value. So we are not having that, but we're getting this instead. So when you recognize in fact, this could actually be an intermediate step. What am I thinking about? Why am I thinking about it? What does the mind want? What's it attached to? That desire or that attachment that you identify, you can ask the question, what's more important than that? So what are you doing here? You're shifting the attention onto something higher. What's more important than that? Answer that question. How can I give that to you now? How can I give it to myself now? What can I do to take a step towards giving myself that, which I find which I've recognized is better than the thing that I'm desiring, that I'm attached to? The other element of the target for your attention is to try and connect it to one of your genuine needs. Okay, so simple example, we need companionship. As human beings, there's no such thing as a single human being. We are multiple. We clump into groups and families and partnerships and friendships all the time. So it's a natural part of who and what we are, is to create connections. So let's say I've lost a friend or a partner. What do I want? I want that person back in my life. Okay, and it's not possible. They've passed away. What is the need that is being pointed at by this whole thing? Well, I want connection. I want human connection. That's what I'm missing from that person not being in my life. Once you can connect that call of the mind, which might be asking for something that is unreasonable or unhealthy, to a genuine need, then you can go to that same question, how can I give myself that right now? What can I do? What's a step that I can take towards giving myself that? So you are rising above the activity of the mind, right? You're not just, so when we talk about restraint, it doesn't just mean shutting it off. In fact, it never means shutting it off. Restraint that only negates what the mind is doing is not full restraint. It's not healthy self-restraint. To simply negate what the mind is doing, to cut the thought flow, can result in suppression. And you don't actually deal with the cause, you're only cutting off the effect. Now, that's not to say that that's never a strategy that can be used. There may be times where the thought pops up and you see it for what it is. It's a garbage thought that occasionally comes into my mind, and I've done all the thinking, just clip it. So sometimes just clipping it and moving on is going to be the correct strategy. But we probably tend to overdo that strategy when we need to deal more in some of the underlying aspects of what we're experiencing. And so dealing with the mind like it's a separate entity to you, or dealing with that part of the mind and looking to understand it like you would with a child. What's really going on for you? And then looking for something higher and healthier that you can connect it to. So if my best friend has passed away, I want him back in my life. What would you say to a child? And again, it wouldn't be necessarily a 6-year-old. It might be a 12-year-old. It might be a 16-year-old. What would you say? How would you speak? Give the mind that information. Not just the information, but also the same emotional content. And the mind may reply with something else. Okay, keep going. But you're looking for that resolution to give the mind what its genuine needs are and to connect it to something higher. So this is where your ideals and your growth goals are so important. If you have an understanding of what your growth goals are, when you are in this kind of situation, you can draw on them as a thing to connect your attention to. And another aspect here is that in the same way that if you have a nagging physical problem that doesn't go away, you go and see someone who's professionally trained to figure out what's going on. If you have a nagging psychological ailment, pain, problem, whatever you want to call it, it's not going away. Similarly, you might go to a psychological doctor, a psychologist, to draw on their experience and their expertise in helping you to do what you are doing to resolve it. So there's nothing counterproductive per se about a psychotherapeutic approach to some of these things. It can be one of the, if you like, the tools that you're using in your overall spiritual journey to help you orient your attention in the right place. Yeah, another one of the key aspects of this is that when you have identified what the mind is doing, that you move to an actionable step. So we're familiar with the receipt reaction response mechanism. Maybe we receive a stimulus which reminds us of the thing. Okay, that sends us into reaction. Okay, negative thought patterns, negative emotions, we go round and round in that reaction phase. We need to get out of the reaction phase and into the response phase. So that's what a lot of this questioning is getting us towards. What are my ideals? What can I do towards that ideal now? Okay, that's into the response phase, an actionable step. What does the personality need? What needs are being frustrated here? How can I provide that need? What can I do about it now? So connecting to needs and ideals are great ways to get into that response phase so that you're moving through receipt, reaction, response rather than getting stuck in that second phase of reaction. Okay, any other clarifications? Okay. So yeah, as far as just one other thought on the on managing that, have a look at how that element of the mind that you keep returning to, or that it keeps returning to, let's have a look at how it expresses as action. What kind of behavior does it become in general? And it might not. It might not actually be something that expresses itself in different ways in different places as behavior. But look where it does. So let's say, for example, my partner has passed away a year ago, and I don't want to go out anymore. I go, can be bothered. Every time I went out, I'd go out with my partner. Go see friends. It was the two of us. Go to my family. It was the two of us. Go to the gym. We'd often go twice, together. The beach, go together. So what's happening is that my indulgence in the negative experience is expressing as the behavior of staying home. One of the ways to deal with that then is to put the complementary or the opposite behavior consciously into your life. Because what you're saying to yourself is that if I'm not with my partner, I can't enjoy life. I can't enjoy friends. I can't enjoy the beach. There's a thought pattern there which is being said to yourself. Your mind is continuing to say it to you itself. You want to reverse that thought pattern or untangle it or neutralize it. How do you do that? Well, by saying the opposite. So identify the behavior that the thought pattern is promoting. So let's call it staying home. What would you like to do instead? Go out. By myself, with other friends, with family members, but go out. What happens if I do go out? What am I afraid of? Well, I'm afraid that I'm just going to be reminded more and more and more that I'm on my own, because I used to do it with her, and now I'm alone. If I go out, I'm going to feel more and more alone. Well, is that really the case? If you go out and you're around people, will you feel alone? Begin to question that assumption. Okay, well, what can I do to question that assumption, to see if I'm right? What experiment can I run? Well, I can go out. So you might call another trusted friend and say, look, I'm struggling with this loss and it's making me stay at home. I want to go out more often. I need someone to sort of, help me along here. Can you? Yeah, sure, of course I can, man. You know me. I'm here for you. So you might consciously and deliberately put in actions that are countermanding the one that is being ordered by this underlying feeling of loss and some of the associated thoughts and thought patterns surrounding it. Okay, any further clarifications there? Okay. So another question that came through for this week is, what is confession, for example, in the Christian faith, and how is it helpful? Okay. So let's look at spiritual practice in general, because this is obviously the context of the question. In terms of what spiritual practice is, let's define it in this way. It's maintaining that confluence of intellect and mind towards the higher, right? The higher value, the higher goal, the higher aspects of life. It's then acting from that confluence and towards it. As we practice, we develop a greater mental peace. Agitations quieten down, preoccupations for various things diminish, so our attention is less scattered. That mental peace allows us to practice further. So practice and mental peace are on this virtuous cycle. And of course, it's not a two-dimensional cycle. When we're going around and around, we're actually ascending as we do this. So the question is, what role can confession play in this? So one thing, of course, I have to say is that I'm not a Christian, not a practicing Christian, and I don't have a huge background of knowledge in it. So we're sort of looking more from a philosophical perspective here. So when it comes to our spiritual growth, let's have a look at what we need. Right? There are certain needs that we have in order for us to practice spirituality. And they are material, physical, and psychological, of course. The aspect of confession, let's just look at the psychological. Okay, so for spiritual growth, you need an ideal, a goal that you're going to strive towards, and you need inspiration towards it. There's no use having a goal or an ideal that doesn't do anything, doesn't move you. It's got to be an inspiring one. So ideal and inspiration are necessary. Once you've got a place you want to go to, then you need the practices that we're familiar with. Gratitude, devotion, and mystery. Right? That's for the emotional side of the personality. Knowledge, meaning here information, and analysis and reasoning. Right? These are clearly for the intellectual side of the personality. We need self-reflection and introspection, continuing to check in what's true for us so that we know how to navigate and negotiate through our spiritual path. Selfless action is a third of our disciplines, and a community. So these are the psychological needs that we have in order to practice spirituality. So then how does confession relate? Okay, so what is confession? Very generally speaking, you have a penitent, someone who they feel themselves to be a sinner, and a priest who stands in for Christ or God. I think this is taking the Christian perspective here. There may be confession in other religious or philosophical or spiritual traditions. The whole idea of confession presumes that the person coming is authentic in their desire to change. They're authentically feeling sorry for it. It's not that they've been ushered off to confession by their parents and they're just listing off a few things they know are wrong, but they don't feel bad. They just, So the taking here presumes that the person is going of their own free will, inspired by a feeling of unpleasantness or guilt, a burden of guilt for their wrongdoing, and they're resolving to change as a result. What happens? The penitent approaches the priest, confesses their wrongdoings, and offers a prayer of contrition. The priest then assigns a penance, something for them to do, and offers a prayer of absolution. Nothing is completed. Very generally what it is. So if you take those aspects of confession and look at the needs that we discussed with regards to spirituality, how does it relate? Okay, so humility, gratitude, devotion, and mystery. Where's that taken care of? Okay, so the moment that you are explaining or confessing your wrongdoings to another, it immediately brings in an element of humility. You are exposing your wrongdoings. You're exposing what you might consider your lower desires and attachments, your lack of control. And these are not things that we want to do. We want to protect our ego and protect our vision of ourselves and the perception of others. And so the moment we confess, there's an act of humility right in there. The fact that you are connecting, if you like, with God, with divinity, with Christ, through the priest, it's a devotional experience. You feel connected to something higher. Now, is there a rational component to this? Not really. You may feel that there is, or you may be able to pull a rational component out, which is fine, but primarily this is an emotional experience that you're having. So there is that sense of devotion, of being connected to the higher. As you get a prayer of absolution, you are absolved of your sins, you get that sense of gratitude, of having been the recipient of divine mercy, compassion, forgiveness. So humility, gratitude, devotion, mystery. These are all fully taken care of with that that authentic, autonomous approach to confession. Self-reflection and introspection. The moment you confess, it means that you've gone inward to find out what it is that you feel guilty about. You've looked within and you have found aspects of your personality that you'd like to be different. This is the whole practice of self-reflection, introspection, and you have resolved to change, which means that you are connecting with your higher ideals. So self-reflection, introspection, all part of it. Ideal and inspiration, exactly that. You resolve to be different. You resolve to be better. You're connecting with your ideal. You receive the absolution from the priest or from Christ or from God. You feel a sense of gratitude. You feel a sense of renewed experience of yourself. And so there's that inspiration to move forward. Selfless action. The very fact that you're doing this is selfless. Again, to walk up to someone and to confess things that you've done wrong goes directly against what the ego wants. We're always engaged in perception management of ourselves to others. And we just hide away the things that we think are going to be of a detriment to my perception, to my reputation, if people know about it. The whole practice of going to expose those to somebody else is a selfless action. It goes against the ego. The penance that you're given may also be a selfless action, and a sense of community. So that comes from perhaps connection to a priest or to the person doing that for you. You're not on your journey alone. You're with that person. And it may also give you a sense of community because you recognize this is something that the entire congregation does. We all do this. We all go to the priest, we all give our confession, and so on and so forth. So having a practice that you all do can give you a sense of being part of a larger community. So what's happening essentially is that burden of guilt that comes with wrongdoing, the mental agitation that arises from not following your own conscience, is relieved. Now, who's doing it? You are doing it. You are relieving that burden with your sincerity, your authenticity, with the act of explaining or the act of confessing, with that resolution to turn around and be better. That is actually being done by you. The priest who is there engaging in it with you is one of the tools that you are using. But the idea is that by accepting and accepting the wrongdoing of the past and connecting to the ideal for the future, you shed the mental agitation that arises from not following your own conscience, and you move forward with that renewed inspiration to go towards the ideal. Okay, any clarifications there? Or to anything else that we covered? Or to anything else that we didn't cover? Any other questions or any points that you want to raise? Okay, if not, we can have an early finish. Appreciate the questions and the attendance. We're back on Sunday for our Vedanta Treatise, Monday for the new Q&A, Tuesday for Gita, and on we go. So as always, feel free to email any questions through. We can take them up on the Mondays and the Fridays. Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks.
Adios.